how to never run out of interesting things to say in a conversation. There's many, many videos about this on YouTube. I think it's an important topic. People, you find yourself in a conversation sometimes, especially if you're just meeting someone in a business environment, or maybe you're at a bar or a party and you're meeting someone that you're interested in romantically and you'd like to get to know. You start to have a conversation with them. You exchange a few pleasantries. You say hello, how are you, etc. And then after a few turns, uh, you start to run out of things to talk about, and it gets really awkward. And then there's a long pause, and nobody knows what to say, and you just kind of slink away into the darkness, ashamed and embarrassed and feeling like a failure that you didn't have anything to say. The same thing can happen in business. You're at a cocktail party, you're at a reception, you're at a meeting, you want to get to know somebody. And after a little bit of small talk, you have nothing else to say. And the conversation kind of dies, and the person, excuses themselves, or you excuse yourself, and you just don't feel good about the interaction. You feel embarrassed, and the whole situation just feels like a social failure. So how can we do better? I have two tips, or maybe three. We'll see how many tips I can generate. But the first one is, it has to do with the connection between um, language and thought, or communication and what you know. So you can never say what you can't think, right? If you can't think it, if you don't have interesting things on your mind, you can't say interesting things. You can, communication and language is about, at least partially about expressing publicly the private contents of your thoughts. So in a conversation, or in any communication situation, what you say is limited by what you're thinking. And so there's two tricks to being able to continue a conversation or have something interesting to say in general. And the first is, you have to know interesting things. You have to have interesting thoughts. There's no way around it. If you want to be interesting in conversation and have things to say, you have to have interesting thoughts in your head. There's simply no alternative, because where are the interesting things going to come from? They have to come from inside your head. So the fundamental trick, and it isn't a trick because it isn't an easy answer. If you came looking for an easy answer, I don't have one, unfortunately, but I have a hard answer that will work and that you can take action on immediately. And that is, you have to immerse yourself in interesting things. And that for me has always meant reading, but also exposing myself to culture. And that's, music, literature, poetry, movies, television, a lot more when I was younger. And now just, Twitter or the internet. You have to read about, or somehow learn about, interesting things in order to have thoughts that are interesting and worth sharing. There's no shortcut. If you want to have interesting things to say, you have to think interesting thoughts. And the only way to think interesting thoughts is to be an interesting person. And that means sort of leading a full life. You can't sort of go out and have good social skills if most of the time you're at home sort of isolated, unless I guess you're home reading great literature or poetry, or watching great movies, or immersing yourself in art or music or something like that. But you've got to fill up the well with interesting content, because when you're in a social situation, all you have is the contents of your thoughts. So I recommend, if you feel like you don't have anything to say in a conversation, if you go to watch a lot of these other videos on YouTube, you'll see that the tips are: ask this question and then ask question, ask about their family and then ask about their work, and ask about their dreams and ask about their hopes. And these are all good things to do. In fact, I think I have sort of if I have one superpower for talking to people, it's that I talk to people about themselves, and that's everyone's favorite topic. So I certainly recommend talking to people about themselves. But even then, you have to have, something interesting to say. You have to have some life experience to draw on that you can relate to theirs. You have to have an understanding of people, so you have good questions to ask them. So I like to talk to I travel a lot for my job, and I like to talk to taxi cab drivers or Uber drivers. They're often really interesting people. In a big city like Chicago, they come from all over the world, and I've had many. It takes about 20 or 30 minutes to get home from the airport to my house, and or from my house to the airport. And I've had many fascinating conversations of 20 to 30 minutes um, with these cab drivers. And I almost always begin by trying to guess where they're from. Uh, and then I've spent, you could say I've wasted a lot of my life, reading news on the internet or, reading books and learning a lot of things. I mean, I'm a college professor, so I've sort of been immersed in learning my whole life, but I know a little bit about a lot of things and a lot of places. And so with these cab drivers, I often just ask them, uh, I try to guess where they're from. And then I normally know a small handful of facts about almost any place in the world, like something about their history or the geography or the language or the culture or the politics or the music. I know something, not very much, I'll be honest with you, but it doesn't take very much. So I'll ask them where they're from. I'll ask them how long they've been in the United States, how they like it. And then I'll ask them about, how much of their family is here in the United States, how much is back home, when do they, how often do they get to go back home? How do they like it here? What is it like driving a cab? What is it like driving Uber? Um, how are the politics back home? How do they compare to the United States? You just talk about all those things. So certainly, you know, asking people about themselves is important, but I don't memorize the set of questions that I ask people. I am genuinely interested in people, and I don't really make small talk. I try to cut immediately to things that are meaningful to people. So I think about um, uh, their lives, their families, the things that are deeply meaningful to them. I try to ask about those things because that's what I'm interested in. I'm not very good at superficial small talk. But I'm quite good at engaging people in conversation about things that are interesting to them, whether that's their work or their hobbies or their passion or their children or where they've traveled or their illnesses. I mean, because I study chronic illness for a living, I'm actually normally really interested in if people have been sick. I'm interested in what that's been like and what that experience was like. So um, I'm circling around to a couple of different tips, but one of my main points was, you can't say interesting things unless you have interesting thoughts. So to be a good conversationalist, more than anything else, you have to immerse yourself in life. You have to lead an interesting life. And at the very least, that means read poetry, literature, watch movies, television, listen to music, expose yourself to art, be immersed in interesting situations, be have some knowledge of politics, because these are all the topics of conversation. And you don't have to be an expert in any of these things, but you have to have kind of passing familiarity of what the cultural conversation is about many of these things, and then you can find a topic that you can talk about with almost anyone. So I think this relates to another idea I have about how can you be eloquent or well spoken. Um, so many times people have asked me, how do you learn to be eloquent? That they ask me, they see that I can be well spoken, and they ask, how can you learn to do that? And I didn't exactly know how. It just sort of came naturally to me. I do think a certain amount of it is probably genetic. My both of my parents talk a lot and my brothers talk a lot. We sort of come from a very talkative family and a family that read a lot and valued education. So I think that's part of it. Um, but also at a very young age, um, I was on the speech team. I say too much. That's something I'm going to try to fix on YouTube. That's a bad habit that I'm going to try to fix. From a very young age, I was on the speech team, and in that context, I memorized sections of plays. I did an event in the speech team called humorous interpretation, meaning I would memorize a section of a comedic play, and then I would act it out all of the characters. You know, one character here, another character here, another character here, and so that experience forced me to memorize plays by famous playwrights, by Elaine May and John Patrick and Shakespeare. I did the Comedy of Errors. I did Adaptation by Elaine May. I did the Tea House of the August Moon by, I think his name is John Patrick. So that burned into my brain at a very young age, this beautiful language. And and when I was young, I used to have almost like a photographic memory too. I could read The Catcher in the Rye or whatever I was reading for English or plays I was memorizing, and I could memorize them very easily without trying. And so those words were in my head, and then it eventually made its way into my speech. Not that I would speak in a Shakespearean way, or I didn't speak Elizabethan words, but somehow that reprogrammed my mind to be able to speak more eloquently. And I recommend it to you too. And so I'm a musician and a song. I fancy myself a songwriter, and I took a songwriting course from Steve Earle, the American songwriter. And one of the things that he said is, well, first of all, he says songwriters should aspire to write songs that are literature, that are as good as literature. And when he said this years before Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature, so I think he was ahead of his time. So Steve Earle said, you cannot expect to write songs that aspire to the level of being literature if you've never read any literature. You have to get literature into your head. You have to get great language into your head in order to produce great language. There isn't a machine in your head that produces new sentences. It doesn't work that way. There's only all the sentences that have ever been spoken and all the phrases that are out there. You have a vocabulary, a lexicon of words, and then much more broadly, there's a lexicon or an idiom of phrases. And I guess there are some, we do speak unique sentences. I wouldn't deny that, but mostly we're absorbing from the world and then regurgitating phrases and clauses and sentences which we've heard before. So what that means is you have to deeply immerse yourself in the idiom that you're trying to master, or deeply immerse yourself in the language that beautiful songs or beautiful lyrics. I immerse myself in the lyrics of Leonard Cohen, of Bob Dylan, of Joni Mitchell, of Gillian Welch, of John Hyatt. You know, these are the songwriters that I love. And I memorize the lyrics, I sing them, I learn them, I dissect them in order to get them into my head. Uh, and I think if you want to improve your eloquence, I recommend the same thing. So this is all um, part of the same advice. If you want to improve the output, then you have to improve the input. You can't consume really shallow, superficial, just memes. You can't read memes all day on the internet and expect to speak clearly. Or you can't be silent all the time or sit alone in your room and expect you have to fill up the well with a lot of content. You constantly be immersing yourself in language, and however you want to speak, you should immerse yourself in the greatest um, practitioners of that form of language. If you want to speak like a poet, you should read poetry. If you want to speak like a playwright, you should read plays. If you want to speak like a pundit, you should read the news. I think in English, the classic, you should read Shakespeare and Abraham Lincoln, Mark Twain. It sort of doesn't get much better than that. Eventually, there's lots of others, but that's a good place to start, to read all those. And then you burn into your brain certain patterns of language, which you will then be able to reproduce. But if we come back to conversation, um, just start reading the news, so you have something to talk about, and get interested in other people. Think about other people's lives, and then be interested in other people's lives and ask them open-ended questions about their own lives. And then just listen to what they say and ask follow-up questions. Be curious. You won't run out of things to say if you listen and you remain curious. Other people's lives are interesting, even people who you think are kind of boring. typically are, if you ask them about their lives, they've had interesting experiences, they've suffered losses, they've had triumphs, they've traveled interesting places or had interesting jobs and things like that. You can people's lives are inherently interesting, and if you show interest in them, you'll have something to talk about. You'll never run out of things to talk about. I think people run out of things to talk about when they try to continue a conversation in a superficial vein. Um, so if you just stay superficial, then you will run out of things to talk about, because eventually the weather or whatever other topics you've memorized, first of all, in a social situation, you'll get too nervous, and whatever you memorized, you'll forget. So that will go out the window. So if you just listen to the person you're talking to and remain interested in their life, you'll never forget what they're talking about. So I want to come back to some of my core themes. You can only say what's in your head. There's no other magic to it. The only words that are accessible to you for during a conversation are the words in your head. So fill your head with lots of interesting thoughts, with lots of interesting words. But there's a second issue related to this. I think, in any of our heads at any given time, William James, the great American philosopher, would talk about the stream of consciousness, meaning that at any moment there is a stream of thoughts. If you've ever tried to meditate, you try to quiet your thoughts, you realize that it's almost impossible. The thoughts just keep coming. There's like an endless stream of them, the metaphor of the stream that just keeps flowing, keeps flowing. There's just a constant stream of thoughts going through your mind at all times. And if you never want to run out of things to say in a conversation, all you have to do is learn to tap into that stream of thoughts. So the advice I gave before is, have interesting thoughts. And I think that's, good advice. But then I think some people might get nervous during a conversation or something, and not, then they kind of freeze, and they can't tap into the stream of thoughts, because there's these thoughts, you can't stop them until you're dead. You always have, or asleep, or even in sleep, you have dreams. So the stream of consciousness is always there. So you have to be able to tap into it. You have to know, what am I thinking? And then take one of those thoughts and bring it up as a topic of conversation. Um, so there's an exercise to help you do this. You may have trouble because of social anxiety or for other reasons, whatever they might be. You might have trouble accessing the stream of consciousness, this unending stream of thoughts, which is running through your mind. So there's an exercise that can help with this. And that exercise is called free writing. So free writing is basically, you take a blank piece of paper, you take a pencil or a pen, you put the pen to paper, and you just write whatever you're thinking, totally unedited, no filter. You just write whatever you're thinking for as long as you can. Start for a minute, 5 minutes, and then try to get up to like 15 minutes. And monitor this stream of consciousness by free writing. And this will teach you to open up or it will help you listen to your own thoughts. It will help you focus on your own stream of consciousness. So I highly recommend that if you're the sort of person that runs out of things to say in a conversation, you've got this infinite resource, the stream of consciousness. And all you have to do is learn to tap into it and learn to overcome maybe the anxiety that shuts you down from accessing your own thoughts in a conversation. So practice free writing. Put pen to paper, write in a totally unfiltered, just try to access the stream of consciousness. Try to monitor every thought that's going in through your head and just write it down. And this will, in a real conversation, there's a lot of thoughts that you actually don't want to share. They're inappropriate for sharing. So, there's a lot of things that we think that you don't want to actually say. And I think that's obvious. But there's inappropriate things that we think. There may be personal things that we think. So you have to edit the stream of consciousness some if you're in a real conversation. But if you have trouble accessing the stream of consciousness, then try free writing as an exercise. And I think it will help you. So I think I'll close there now. It's been kind of fun. We had a couple of people visit. Nobody said hello. I'll say hello, world. Nobody said hello to me, so I'm a little lonely in my live stream. If you like the stuff I said here about how to never run out of interesting things to say in a conversation, this is the kind of video I make about communication skills. If you like this sort of thing, please press like over here and consider subscribing to the channel, and coming on back and being part of this community where we talk about how communication works. You can go to my blog and website at howcommunicationworks.com, sign up for our mailing list, and get access. Even without signing up to the mailing list, you can just browse all the articles I've published on the blog about all sorts of different aspects of communication skill and how communication works. So I hope you're all well and have a pleasant evening. I'll try this live streaming again. It's been kind of fun to access my own stream of consciousness and try not to run out of things to say. So thanks for your attention, and we'll talk to you soon.